So good evening, everyone. Good evening to all of those in Washington, D.C., and good morning to all of you who are joining us from Japan. My name is Shanti Shoji, Director of Programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. I will be your MC for today's event, the Biden Administration's Indo-Pacific Policy, American and Japanese Perspectives. Thank you for joining us for this timely discussion with Prime Minister Suga's visit with President Biden just days away. Sasakawa USA is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization dedicated to deepening the understanding of and strengthening the relationship between the US and Japan for the benefit of a free and open international community. Our activities mainly focus on security and diplomacy through the engagement of exchanges, dialogue, analysis, publications, and networking. Just a few housekeeping issues I'd like to go over. Today's event is being recorded and is on the record. A recap and video recording will be made available on Sasakawa USA's website in the coming weeks. We will have a Q&A session later in the hour. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions as you think of them throughout the event. All right, so getting into tonight's event, I would like to now introduce our three distinguished speakers, each of which have a long list of accolades and accomplishments. Due to our short time together, however, I'll provide just a highlight of these accomplishments. First, we have the Honorable Masashi Adachi, Special Advisor to Prime Minister Suga, responsible for economy and foreign policy, and member, House of Counsellors of Japan. Prior to this, he served 1 year as the Parliamentary Vice Minister of Land, Infrastructure, Transportation, and Tourism. The Honorable Adachi also served as Director, Foreign Affairs Commission of the Liberal Democratic Party for 2 years, as well as Chief Director, Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee of the House of Counsellors. Second, we have the Honorable Randall G. Schriver, former Assistant Secretary of Defense, Indo-Pacific Affairs at the U.S. Department of Defense, and currently the Chairman of the Board of Project 249 Institute. He's also a member of Sasakawa USA's Advisory Committee on Projects. Previously, Secretary Schriver also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, where he was responsible for China, Taiwan, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. And last, but definitely not least, we have Ambassador Kurt Tong, who is partner at the Asia Group. A leading expert on diplomacy and economic affairs in East Asia, Ambassador Tong brings 30 years of experience in the Department of State, having served in Manila, Tokyo, Beijing, Seoul, and Hong Kong. In addition, he was the U.S. Ambassador for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, and Director for Asian Affairs at the White House National Security Council. Ambassador Tong is also a member of Sasakawa USA's Advisory Committee on Projects. I would now like to turn over the program to Dr. Satohiro Akimoto, Chairman and President of Sasakawa USA. Dr. Akimoto, yoroshiku onegai itashimasu.
Thank you, Shanti. Welcome to Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. It's great to see everybody. As Shanti has just introduced, we have a great panel today. I would like to thank Secretary Schriver and Ambassador Tong to be with us. I know you are incredibly busy, so thank you very much. I would like to offer my special thanks to Adachi Sensei for being with us today from Tokyo. It's early in the morning in Tokyo. He's just about ready to pack and leave Tokyo for Washington, accompanying Prime Minister Suga. Prime Minister Suga will be first foreign head of state to meet with President Biden in person at the White House. This is a symbolic confirmation of Japan as a worthy ally from the viewpoint of the United States in the framework of free and open Indo-Pacific. It is also testimony to all the hard work of people like Adachi Sensei to make this happen. Of course, the very good relationship between the United States and Japan has raised the bar for expectation on both sides. There are actually lots of challenges for the bilateral relationship in terms of security, such as Taiwan, human rights, in terms of economy as well, CPTPP, and maintaining the energy and identify something specific to achieve. This is not easy. Now you kind of talk the talk, and this is the time to walk the walk. Can you do that? The visit is very important for Prime Minister Suga in terms of domestic policy in Japan as well. Recently, his approval rate has surpassed disapproval rates. In latest poll by NHK and Kyodo, his approval rates have gone up to mid 40%. In the latest NHK polls, over 70% of Japanese people said it is a good thing to strengthen relationship with the United States, and the Olympics is just around the corner. This is a crucially important time for Prime Minister Suga to renew his leadership in the LDP and extend his prime ministership after September. So it is a pleasure to have Adachi Sensei with us today. I would like to jump right into our conversation at this time. First, I'd like to invite Adachi Sensei to express his expectation for the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Suga and President Biden. Adachi Sensei.
Good evening, everybody. As Mr. Dr. Akimoto said, President Biden and Prime Minister Suga will have the first face-to-face meeting on this Friday. I think it is quite unusual for the US to pick up Japan for the first meeting. And also under the current pandemic situation, even for the US and White House, it might be very, very difficult decision to meet, for President to meet in person any other country's top leader. I think it shows the US thinks the importance of the U.S. Japan alliance, and also the U.S. side think it's very, very important for this relation with Asia. We think this is very, very strong message to Japan, and we really appreciate President Biden has made this very difficult decision to have the first meeting with Prime Minister Suga.
Well, thank you, Adachi Sensei. There's only so much you can talk at this particular time, but we all wish you the very best in the bilateral summit meeting between the United States and Japan at the White House this coming Saturday, I guess. The Biden administration has been aggressively pushing forward its foreign policy agenda. With all due respect to President Biden and his foreign policy team, it has been a pleasant surprise. After all, many pundits thought administration would focus on domestic issues, at least for the first 6 months, maybe a year. After all, there are many pressing issues domestically, such as battle with COVID, revitalizing the economy, improving infrastructure, and mending terrible divisions among Americans, to name a few. It was also a pleasant surprise that the administration has made it clear from the very beginning that Asia is at the center of foreign policy concerns or interest. Of course, how to deal effectively with China is the single biggest focus of the administration's Asia policy. The Biden administration has taken a systematic approach to set the basic tone in the relationship with China at an early stage of the administration. It started with individual consultation with allies, Quad meeting, 2+2 with the Japanese and the Koreans, before they meet Chinese in Alaska. So my first question to each one of you is, what are the major takeaways in the Biden administration's first 85 days with regard to its Asia policy? I'm going to start with Secretary Schriver.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Akimoto, and a pleasure to be with you and Ambassador Tong, and Adachi Sensei. Thank you for your joining us and for your opening remarks. I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that we're seeing mostly continuity with respect to Indo-Pacific policy, particularly on the big strategic questions. As you noted, the characterization of the relationship with China as a strategic competitor continues. They've sustained most of the policies they inherited related to China, whether that be on the economic side, the tariffs, whether that be challenging excessive sovereignty claims and the like. So I think we've seen mostly continuity. I think there has been some recalibration and fine tuning where it comes to working with allies and trying to bring allies along with respect to competition with China. And I think that's a good recalibration. I think that's reflected in the high-level meetings you mentioned, certainly reflected in Prime Minister Suga's visit. I think there was some low-hanging fruit. I think dealing with the burden-sharing issues was a good way to get off on a good footing with both South Korea and Japan. Those were certainly irritants that I think needed to be addressed. But as they go forward, there will certainly be challenges and tests as to whether or not we can stay aligned on some issues. Secretary Kerry, now Special Envoy Kerry, will be going to China soon to talk about climate change. Surely the Chinese will try to create linkages and ask for policy accommodations in exchange for their pledge for cooperation. We'll see how all of that is managed. The Biden administration has talked about reintroducing human rights as a more important issue in our defense and security relationships. So what will that mean for relationships with the Philippines, with Thailand, potentially even with India, a major emerging strategic partner of ours? We've heard very little on trade from the Biden administration. The Trump administration, of course, was criticized for taking one of the very first steps, pulling out of TPP. We've heard nothing really on trade liberalization, whether it be multilateral, bilateral, or what the plans might be. We haven't heard much on North Korea. I think there's a review underway, so we eagerly await that, but that is something that can stress and test alliances as well. I think the tech competition, there's specificity we want to know about, and I think Prime Minister Suga and President Biden will have a chance to talk about that, how we can work on shoring up the integrity of our supply chains, but also how we can be partners on the out-innovate side, the race ahead side, how we can be good partners in terms of R&D. So I give the administration high marks. I think it's largely a story of continuity with some positive recalibration, but there's much still to be known, and people too, by the way. Our mutual friend, Ambassador Crittenbrink, has been named but not gone through confirmation. My old position, we don't know who would take that position at the Pentagon for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs. So still some things to learn, but I would say off to a good start.
Thank you very much for that remark. I will go to Ambassador Tong.
Great, thanks, and thank you very much for creating this opportunity. I think your timing could not be better with Prime Minister arriving here just 2 days from now, and Thursday evening. For what I think will be a extraordinarily positive experience. Adachi-san, I got to apologize. I'm afraid I'm not apologizing, but you're probably not going to have a lot of fun on this trip. As I understand it, you're going to arrive, go to a hotel, and stay there, and then go to the White House, and then go back to the hotel, then go to the airplane, which is not anybody's idea of a fun tour of Washington, but thank you for doing it. I think the Biden strategy on Asia needs to start with a discussion of China. Even though we're talking about the U.S. Japan relationship this evening, and we have this great upcoming visit that will further solidify the U.S. Japan relationship, the China piece is really actually the center of Asia policy. And what Akimoto-san said about how it's the Biden administration would prefer to have a world that just waits for the US to figure out COVID, spur economic recovery, and do other domestic policy considerations. That's not reality. And reality is that the world matters. And then as they look at the world, China is the biggest challenge. And so the Biden team, I think, has turned quickly to try to figure out what their strategy should be towards China. The way I would describe it is that they're starting with strategic competition. They would like to get to a position of competitive coexistence, with competition being the main theme, but relations being smooth and untroubled and without much risk of outright conflict. But they're not there yet. And the strategy would be to start with the competition elements. So I think the goal is to have simultaneous operation of issues of confrontation between the US and China. And these would include technology, first and foremost, the military laydown and positioning in the Western Pacific, and issues related to governance, democracy, and human rights. I think that's actually the priority order for the Biden administration. And that set of issues is the priority. The other issues, cooperation issues on climate, perhaps on disease, although the horses left the barn on that, unfortunately, this time around, but cooperation on, say, North Korea, on Iran, those are important, and the US, I think, will pursue those cooperation possibilities if they're possible. But as Randy is referring to, we'll pursue them without trade-offs. I think that Secretary Kerry's trip to China is actually a recognition by the Chinese side that there is not a trade-off between the climate issue and other issues, and that they have to meet with him anyways. They have to come to the climate summit on April 22nd, and they intend to do that. And in order to do that well, they need to talk to the United States before that. And I don't think the Chinese at this point, after the Alaska meeting, expect a quid pro quo for that conversation. And then the last set of issues, which I think come much later in 2021, if at all this year, are issues of negotiation around trade and around other economic concerns between the US and China. That's the laydown. The goal is to spend the year strengthening relationships with allies, repairing some frayed feelings in Europe in particular, but strengthening those relationships in order to face China as a united whole, and also conduct domestic strengthening to prepare for competition with China. It's been quite striking how much President Biden has referred to China when talking about domestic priorities. It was a major part of his infrastructure plan rollout, which, as many people have said, is not entirely about infrastructure. A lot of it's about industrial policy and industrial strengthening. And much of that was focused on China. So China, China, China. Now Japan. There's a very clear reason in my mind why the Japanese Prime Minister is the first visitor to Washington. It's because Japan is the most important partner of the United States on the most important foreign policy issue, which is China. And that is both the reality, and I expect that the China-related conversation to heavily dominate what President Biden and Prime Minister Suga talk about on Friday. A lot of discussion, again, on technology, on military laydown, some discussion on democracy, human rights, and other sort of thought leadership issues, but always with China in the background, if not the foreground, and the assumption of what can the US and Japan do together to deal with this issue. And I expect some significant outcomes, actually, from this visit. The ones that I'm looking for most closely, and it can be cute and say that there are 3 T's for this visit. Tomodachi, which is like being friends, and that will happen. It'll be a very positive meeting. The optics will be good. They'll probably help Prime Minister Suga in his domestic political standing. That's the first T. The other 2 are Taiwan and technology. What exactly comes out of this meeting on Friday with respect to Taiwan, I think is both very timely and very, very important. And I'm eagerly awaiting to see what the language will be in that area. And the other is technology cooperation. The goal, I think, shared goal is to try to have a strong joint economy that protects itself from the vulnerabilities that are created by China's growing capabilities in technology. And that is difficult. It's really hard. It's complicated. Has a lot of players involved, both countries and companies, a lot of technologies involved, and how that gets sorted out. I'm really eager to see what kind of framework the US and Japan come up with.
Thank you very much, Adachi Sensei. What's your take on takeaways from President Biden's first 85 days in terms of his Asia policy?
Okay. If we see Biden administration's 85 days on Asia foreign policy, first point is we see the continuity of foreign policy in Asia, especially with China. Our basic stance is unchanged. And also at the beginning, Biden administration used the term prosperous and secure Indo-Pacific. And at that time, we were a little bit concerned whether it's the same to free and open Indo-Pacific, because the word itself, the difference is very minor, but prosperous and secure seems not to have some value issue. Instead, we think free and open means more value contents. So at the beginning, we tried to integrate the concept or the vision. So through the Quad summit meeting, the US is now use the same term, free and open Indo-Pacific. So we are a little bit released, in fact. So also other area, we see the continuity of foreign policy for Asia. The main issue is how to push back China's aggression. So in that sense, we have the same concern on that. Of course, Japan's case, we have a little bit different stance because Japan is a neighbor country to China. And in fact, between Japan and China, we haven't had the top leaders going and coming for more than 8 years. The last going and coming was 2012. Since then, in 2018, Prime Minister Abe visited Beijing, but we haven't received President Xi yet. On the other hand, between the US and China, until 2017, these two countries had the top leaders going and coming. So that's the reason at the that's the reason last several years, Japan tried to get more friendly to China because we wanted to come back to the ordinary or normal diplomatic relationship. But as you might know, recently there are so much geopolitical tension around the area, then the situation is changing. But still, we haven't had the normal diplomatic relationship with China. Only we have the multilateral conference meeting or something. So in that sense, we have a little bit different stance with China. Also, second point, Biden administration shows its characteristic is the approach. at the time of Trump administration, basic approach with China was bilateral negotiation with China. Between the US and China, there are so many trade dispute discussions. However, basically it's just between the two countries. But this time, Biden administration tried to work together with all the allies and partner countries. That's a big difference. So we are willing to talk with Biden administration. And the main issue is, of course, how to manage China relations. And the bottom line is it's best for all the allies and partner countries to keep the regional security safe and also keep the status quo, I think. So we agree on, we have the deep or strong concerns against the unilateral force, change of the status quo by unilateral force. That's a baseline. And in order to that we are willing to discuss through the Quad and through the BI and also with NATO countries. And third point, I think Biden administration's approach is President Biden himself broadened the issues with China. Of course, at the time of Trump administration, there are so many issues with China. However, President Trump himself was so focused on trade issues. Secretary Pompeo and other secretaries talked about so many value issue, technology issue, or all these issues. But President Trump himself much focused on trade issues. But this time, President Biden also focused on the China's issues. That's what we feel. And also, recently, China's stance is also a little bit changing. Not changing, but they revealed, if you see the discussion at Alaska between the US and China, China revealed their clear desire to change international order, or they want to even advocate their value. That was a little bit shocking to me, because they clearly said the Western type democracy doesn't work. And all these kind of things he clearly mentioned in China clearly mentioned in public. That's a little bit shocking situation. Of course, they talked similar thing for last 2-3 years, but it's more vague words. But this time they clearly mentioned. That's big change, I think. So one of the important thing for the US and Japan and all the allies we have to send the clear message: don't make miscalculation. That means I think China thinks this is a good time to change international order, but we don't think this is time, or even it's not. It should not be happen. So this kind of a message to avoid miscalculation is quite important for all the allies. In that sense, right now, the approach of Biden administration is taking and the way Biden administration is focusing on Asia on the right direction.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask one security-related question before I move on to ask economic-related question. Security-related question, you all, you three agree that it's China, China, China. And Adachi Sensei mentioned a little bit different interests that Japan has as they sit next to China. But also he expressed a deep concern about this conflict between different models. During the Trump administration, popular media used the word another Cold War, and I didn't take it seriously, but when people started to talk about American model versus Chinese model, or a battle of ideology, certainly it started to have a tinge of a Cold War. And one big flexion point between or among Japan, China, and the United States is obviously Taiwan. And Adachi Sensei mentioned the importance of sending out a clear message. And in the United States, there's a debate of having a little more clearer message, strategic clearance over strategic ambivalence. And I just wonder if Secretary Schriver and Ambassador Tong elaborate on U.S. position on Taiwan at this particular time, or the discussion that are going on in Washington. And I'll ask Adachi Sensei to follow up on that before you come to Washington. So Randy, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, I think the Biden administration has supported our longstanding commitments to Taiwan. I think Secretary Blinken just this weekend was asked on one of the Sunday programs about the possibility of defending Taiwan. He said he wouldn't answer a hypothetical, but he did say we have commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act, and it would be a mistake for China to think they could change the status quo unilaterally through force. So I think what we're seeing is a very traditional approach and underscoring the legal obligations and the importance of Taiwan to the United States. We've also learned that they're sending a high-level delegation of former government officials, Rich Armitage, Jim Steinberg, and Senator Chris Dodd to Taiwan to communicate reassurance and support for Taiwan. I think that's an important step. I have an opinion on the question of strategic clarity, and I do think there should be some nuanced change to our approach, and I think we should support strategic clarity and tactical ambiguity. I think the strategic clarity, we should be willing to say in public, it is in our interest for Taiwan to continue to survive and exist in its current status or better. We should say it's not in our interest for Taiwan to be absorbed into the PRC, particularly while the CCP is in power and is behaving the way they are behaving and have the ambitions they have. But there's always going to be a degree of tactical ambiguity because scenarios are different. A blockade is different than an invasion, which is different than a cyber attack. And of course, we still have a Congress that gets a vote on these things when matters of war and peace are involved. So you'll never have an administration be able to say with great specificity exactly what we'll do in the event of a Taiwan contingency. But I think saying it's in our interest for Taiwan to continue to exist and survive is something I would support. And by the way, for our Chinese interlocutors, they should well understand the history. There's never been a time where Taiwan was threatened that the U.S. didn't do something, whether that's in the early 50s with the 7th Fleet, whether that's the later 50s, the island shelling campaign and the logistic support we provided, whether that's 1996 and the aircraft carriers deploying around Taiwan. So it would be an aberration of history for us to do nothing. So I think given our history, given our legal obligations, given what the Biden administration has put forward, we're serious about our commitments to Taiwan. And I'm encouraged by the discussions that are taking place between the United States and Japan on these matters. They were very good and very forward-leaning during the Trump administration, the conversations I took part in. And by all indications, they continued to be a topic of discussion where we're in alignment and where we're talking about real things we can do as an alliance to buttress deterrence, which is an important thing.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Tong, if I may also add one additional question, which is you are in Hong Kong before you retire from the State Department. I just wonder if you could also add how Chinese calibrate U.S. calibration with regard to defense of Taiwan, in addition to your view on American attitude toward China, Taiwan.
That's a great question, and I thought you were going to ask me to compare Hong Kong and Taiwan situations. They're quite different, somewhat linked in the minds of Beijing policymakers, but the situations are very different. It's best to consider them separately. I very much agree with what Randy was saying with respect to getting the right balance between strategic ambiguity and strategic clarity. There needs to be clarity in China's minds that the United States has a key interest in, as Randy was saying, Taiwan's integrity and its society and its rights as a set of people on an island that are currently looking after themselves. All of that is summed up in the idea of not making changes in the status quo and not upsetting the balance across the straits. The danger in the Taiwan situation is perceptions, and that each side sees what the other side is doing as upsetting that balance. So I think that some of the calls that we hear in Washington these days or in think tanks to remove ambiguity and provide an ironclad commitment to Taiwan's defense, regardless of the circumstances, would be very much seen on the Chinese side as a change in the status quo and creating instability in the Taiwan Straits. On the other hand, not responding to China's pressure would send the opposite signal, that China can succeed in pressuring its way into a non-peaceful, non-amicable resolution of the differences between Taiwan and the PRC. So it's a delicate balance. I think the administration's doing reasonably well on this front. I'm a little concerned about the possibility of getting into a tit-for-tat cycle on action-reaction, because when you get into that situation, each side thinks it's the other one that is responding to, and that can be self-perpetuating. For Japan, I think the situation is quite clear. There are numerous Japanese territories that are closer to Taiwan than they are to Okinawa. And in order to defend those, and in order to be capable in the event of any kind of military scenario surrounding Taiwan, Japan needs to have significant defensive capabilities over the non-Seychelles, over the southwestern islands. Those capabilities, in my personal view, need enhancement and require additional investment by Japan. And also Japan's own stance with respect to its interests in Taiwan, economic, political, social, could be further clarified, I think, in useful ways, including in the context of the U.S. Japan alliance. I know Japan wants to be very careful on this front because of what I was just saying about the possibility of creating a cycle that then actually makes things worse. But I do think that there's room for maneuver for Japan here and for some forward steps, both rhetorically and in terms of strengthening of military capabilities.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, Adachi Sensei has to leave at 7:30, so we have about 20 minutes to go. So we're going to speed up a little bit, but
Right.
and also I understand that there's only so much that Sensei can talk about Taiwan before the meeting between President Obama, Biden and the Prime Minister Suga. But you know, you said that it is important for United States and Japan to send a clear message. But at the same time, a Japanese attitude toward China may be slightly different from United States attitude toward China at this particular time. What is your take on Taiwan from Japanese viewpoint?
Yes. As Kurt said, Taiwan issues is closely related to Japan's issues. That means we have Senkaku and we have Okinawa. And Senkaku and Okinawa is very close to Taiwan. And also we are pretty much concerned about recent China's activities around Senkaku Island. They have enacted Chinese Coast Guard law, and they are trying to enforce the law in our territorial sea. So that kind of thing happened around in the East China Sea. And also we have the Article 5 of the U.S. Japan Security Treaty, and by the administration clearly mentioned Article 5 covers Senkaku. So under this situation, we have to consider what's the best way to send the message to China in order to maintain the status quo around East China Sea. And also another thing I am a little bit concerned is the way of interpreting the international law. Japan is a member country of UNCLOS. Unfortunately, the US is not, but we are a little bit concerned about how China interpreted UNCLOS international law if we see their activities. So the rule of law in East Asia is also very important issue for us. And Hong Kong issue, even though the issue might be a little bit different, but the respect to the international or the respect to the treaty is the issue or important element of international law. In that sense, we are also have a keen concern about that. So this kind of thing also, all these issues we would like to talk with Biden administration.
Thank you very much. You know, at the beginning, we talked about the missing piece, which is economy. And despite the fact that the U.S.-Japan relationship is strong, Quad is forming nicely, but you know, economic side is a little bit unclear. It doesn't look like Biden administration is going to pick up conversation on CPTPP anytime soon. That Sensei, what does Japan, or do you expect or wish from the United States in terms of economic cooperation and economic strategy in Asia?
We would like to discuss with the Biden administration whether China's competition is fair or not. That means still China has a status of developing countries. They are not a member country of OECD, so they don't comply with OECD's guideline for the international competition. And also, as to a climate change response, they are taking the position of a developing country. But already China is a big country in terms of the economy, So we would like to ask them the responsibility of the big state. So the way China is running economy is totally different from our world, Western world. So under that circumstances, what the fair competition is? This is very difficult and important question.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Tong, you worked on APEC. You worked on economic issues. What's the discussion within the Biden administration in terms of a big economic strategy as a component of a free and open Indo-Pacific?
I think it's related, as Adachi Sensei is saying, very related to China. And the whole question of China's participation in the international rules, international order is very much a challenge to the East Asian economic system. I would expect to see dialogue, maybe not so much this week, but in the coming year, pretty close cooperation between the U.S. and Japan in 4 areas in the Asia Pacific. Certainly, as I was discussing earlier, in technology and in terms of setting technology controls and figuring out what the benchmarks are for essentially proper and improper technological cooperation with a country with whom we have a competitive military relationship collectively. That's number one. Number 2 would be the digital rules. Japan has taken enormous lead in this area with the digital free flow with trust idea that was promoted into the G7 and G20. And I think there's great opportunity to build off of that, perhaps in the form of a digital services agreement in the Asian region, but perhaps also bringing in Europe. That would make it more challenging, given European approaches to privacy issues and others. But there's a lot of potential around the digital agenda. I would add to that the whole question of subsidies and how subsidies are treated. That becomes more of a WTO issue than a regional issue. But it is true that the TPP, the CPTPP now, has a stance on the proper role of state-owned enterprises and competition, and that can be leveraged in a regional context as well, perhaps in APEC, perhaps elsewhere, to try and push back on the idea that government subsidies of international business activity can be bottomless and not be challenged. And then the last is the whole infrastructure area. And again, Japan has been more active than the United States in responding to the Belt and Road. I think the US will have more to do on this, or more to say about it in the coming months and years as it reorganizes around the Development Finance Corporation. But certainly that cooperative nexus between the US, Japan, and Australia that has built up on infrastructure, there's a lot of potential there. So I mentioned those because they're important, at the top of the agenda. And again, the common denominator in all of them is that Japan is a central part of the strategy.
Thank you very much. I promised Adachi Sensei that he will get out of here by 7:30. So if I may ask one last question to Adachi Sensei. We've been talking about U.S., Japan, China, and economic issues. Your background is a businessman as well. Where does Japanese business community stand on this? They have a significant interest in China.
Yes, still most
Make sure
of
that you can leave by 7:30.
Okay. Most of Japanese business still thinks China is a big market and China is growing market. Then still many Japanese companies are investing in China. But recent tension between the US and China, and also there's several incidents happened for Japanese company to reconsider the proper way of maintaining a global supply chain. several companies are already shifted their manufacturing facility from China to any other countries, or even they add some other place in addition to China. We call China Plus. So this kind of approach is now starting, but still most of Japanese business think China is growing market. But on the other hand, we have to consider even in case we entered into that big growing market, I'm a little bit suspicious about that, but that market is very fair market for the foreign countries, foreign companies. That's another difficult issue. And also Japanese interest, business interest in China is maybe a little bit smaller than the US business interest in China. Then we have to consider that. And if we are forced to choose China or the US, we have to choose the US. That's the bottom line, I think.
Thank you very much. It's been a privilege for Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA to hold this wonderful event. We had a substantial conversation on important issues, and I really appreciated all three of you, but particularly Adachi Sensei for participating from Tokyo. And I would let you go at 7:30, but originally this meeting was planned after a summit meeting between Prime Minister Suga and President Biden. So hopefully we'll be able to invite you back after your visit to Washington and continue our discussion among three of us. So thank you very much, all of you, for attending, and I really appreciated your time, and best of luck to your visit to Washington toward the end of this week. So thank you very much. See you again.